Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm the managing editor at Worn and Wound. We have a fun show for you today. I'm joined by two guests, two of my colleagues. Garrett Jones, our photographer at Worn and Wound. Garrett, how's it going?
It's going great, Kazan. The weather's chilling off. The leaves are starting to turn. I'm getting ready to be very busy with my camera in hand.
Fall is in the air. Garrett's busy. We're all busy. I know our other guest is busy. Ricardo Sime, Wind Up Watch Shop manager. I don't know how you found time to come on the podcast with Wind Up New York City approaching. You must be swamped. But thank you for finding, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, however long this ends up being, to come on the podcast. It's great to have you.
Yeah. I'm literally, I tape the door shut to make sure no one comes in asking me about something. So yeah, hopefully I could last a full 45 and not just get yanked off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, if someone does come in and ask you a burning question about the upcoming Wind Up Watch, it's just a little added color for the podcast, a little peek behind the curtain. You know, we're all swamped getting ready for the biggest event of the year. It's the World Series of Wind Up Watch Fairs coming right up very soon. So, well, it's great. It's great to have you both here. The topic today that we're going to discuss is something that's sort of like, I don't know, like one of the original watch forum questions, I think, which is, what are some alternatives to popular watches? This is like, when you get into watches, this is like the thing that you like initially start researching. I feel like a lot of people kind of like got into enthusiasm through looking for like the answers to these questions. So we've identified a couple of watches, popular watches, luxury watches that maybe we can find some alternatives for that are a little bit more affordably priced. I also want to talk about if this is like a good path to go down as a collector, and what are sort of like the pros and cons of even thinking about this as an approach, because it's honestly not something that we discuss a whole lot on Worn and Wound on the editorial side, but it's just one of those sort of like ever present topics in the watch community. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of like provide our spin on it in a unique way. So we're going to get into that idea in just a bit. But before we do, let's do a quick wrist check. Garrett, what are you wearing today?
Yeah, I've got it's the Bulova Lunar Pilot Damascus. I can't remember the name of the artist it's collaboration with, but absolutely gorgeous, striking dial full of blues and silver hues. Just looks great from a distance. It stands out. It's easily recognizable, and I love it.
Yeah, that's a really cool watch. That was that one that like came in for like photography or whatever, and you just decided like I need to have this because it's
we picked them up in the shop and I shot them, and then I quickly fell in love with it, which is one of the occupational hazards of being a watch photographer in the watch industry. And put one on order, got it in a couple weeks later, and it's been off and on the wrist pretty consistently since.
Yeah, that's a cool watch. I think that there are. When that Lunar Pilot first was, reissued a few years ago, I honestly was not a huge fan of it. And then I started doing like variations on it, like different colors and dial treatments. There's a couple of meteorite versions, I think.
Yeah.
And
yeah, they've done a couple of meteorites, a red dial.
Yeah.
I know I'm missing some in there, but a lot of variations now.
This new one, the Damascus one, is like, I think the coolest variant that I've seen. It's a really, really cool piece. Ricardo, what are you wearing?
So I am another victim of being too close to watches. I am wearing my Doxa Sub 250. It's the GMT. I think I haven't stopped wearing this since Chicago. All my other watches are jealous. I just can't help it. It's a beautiful watch. And yeah, I just like the watch. There's just the classic vibe to it that you can't really get with a lot of watches.
Sure.
And yeah, I just love the thing.
Another really cool watch. Last time I was in the office, I saw you wearing it, and we had a conversation about like how I really like the way Doxas look on other people. Like that watch looks great on you. Whenever I put on a Doxa, I always think this doesn't look quite right on my wrist. It's like kind of I don't know if it's the shape of the case or the size of the dial compared to the case. It's just I appreciate them aesthetically, but for some reason on my wrist, when I look down at them, something doesn't compute, but I always enjoy seeing other people wear them. And that's a very, very cool piece. Glad you're still enjoying that. I'm wearing a relatively recent pick. I'm wearing a Seiko Presage. Or actually, it's not a Presage. It's a Seiko Cocktail Time pre-Presage, before they started using that brand name. This is sort of like thinking about like those sort of core watch enthusiast questions. This is a watch that I feel like is one of those like core, like watch enthusiast watches. It's one of the most commonly, at least in my day when I was like kind of coming up and learning on the forums, this is a watch that you heard discussed a lot and it was recommended a lot on the forums. And I've owned a couple of them over the years, and I saw this one on eBay and just thought, well, this is inexpensive and nostalgia's pulling me in, so I might as well. And it's cool. It's a lot of fun. I think I paid like $350 or something like that. It's a beautiful watch for like, under $400. It's just really, really cool. And like, I think a genuine part of like watch enthusiast history, like at this point. So I'll write something about this. I've got some sort of like rough plans in the works to kind of talk about this watch. So more to come on that soon, but wrist check out of the way. Let's talk about alternatives to popular watches. I think that, I don't know if you guys can, we can start by sharing our experiences, kind of like coming up in the forums or in the, other watch communities. Is this something that you guys experienced when you were learning about watches, kind of like fighting through forum threads, discussing, like how to get something equivalent to X without, spending 10 grand or whatever? Is this an idea that's like familiar to you? Ricardo, we can start with you because I know you've been sort of like involved in this maybe a little bit longer than Gary. You might have a stronger memory of some of those early forum days.
You can just call me young. It's fine.
Very strong memories. I think it's almost like part of the program once you get into watches, that you kind of go through this step where you tell yourself, okay, I really, really like that watch, but for whatever reason, I can't afford it. I can't really get it right now, whatever. And you just immediately start saying, okay, what comes close to that? What is something, either the specs, the look, they're very close to each other. And you just can't help it. And you just fall down a rabbit hole of like very close contenders. But what ended up happening for me was like within like a year of doing that, I immediately got back to the like asking myself the question, is it just that watch that I want? And the alternatives are just not going to suffice. And then another year of thinking about that and then deciding on something completely different. But I do feel it's just a part of the program. Like those watches are in front of you so often, either through Instagram or whatever forums that you're on. It's hard not to dream of them and start thinking of equivalents or alternatives.
Yeah. Garrett, how about you? Is this something you've run into? And do you think that there can be satisfaction in owning an alternative to something that you actually want? I know for me personally, like I never found that to be particularly, a particularly satisfying way to collect. I always just wanted, as Ricardo kind of alluded to, I always just kind of wanted the thing that I wanted. And if I tried to like, scratch that itch with something else, it never really worked long term. But I'm curious to hear your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat. So, I can give real time example of this. Around this time last year, I had been wanting a Speedy for years, and it had been the Grail, and had bought two kind of entry level, what I would call alternatives. And I won't name any brand names. I won't call them out. They're fantastic watches. But what it really did was it just kind of like gave me a taste of what I wanted. It's kind of like when you open a bag of chips and you eat that first chip and you're like, oh, this is great. I'm going to finish the bag. And that was the same mindset that I had. I kind of got the taste of the Speedy aesthetic and what I wanted it to be. And then I just had to go get the Speedy. So, it's definitely something that I've seen across a number of watches, myself and others included. But for me, if I pick up an alternative, it just kind of justifies why I wanted the first one. And then I have to go get the original one anyways.
So you never had the experience of buying the alternative and just thinking, well, this is satisfying. Like, this is enough. I can just live with this. It always ends up being like a gateway to something else.
Yeah,
is that your experience, Ricardo?
What it's funny, my experience tends to be the other way around. So like I get to that point where I'm just like, okay, this isn't going to suffice. And then I built up the main course for so long that once I finally get it, I'm just like, you know what? It's not what I expected it to be. And then I kind of fall back to the quote unquote alternatives, and I just go like, okay, like this works out just well. I almost feel like if you start off, which is something that of course I'm going to say is difficult for everyone. You can't just go straight to the main course, but if you like get at least some time with it, like you'll be surprised how quickly you're just like, you know what? Yeah, this is okay, but I don't really need it. And then the alternatives end up not really being alternatives. They end up being just like nicer, more interesting versions of what it is you originally wanted.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's honestly like that kind of lines up with my way of thinking as well. I wanted to also kind of like ask you guys about like the idea of homage watches, which is I think tightly related to this, but like maybe like a slightly different thing, you know, altogether. I've always felt that like homage watches that are like really meant to look like a copy basically of you know, like a more expensive or, you know, highly sought after luxury watch or whatever, are particularly unsatisfying. And I don't know which watches you selected for the, you know, for this exercise that we're about to go through, but I kind of like told myself like straight up homage watches are like kind of off the table for this. Yeah, do you guys have any strong feelings about homage watches either way?
So I will say, like, as someone that kind of got into watches in my early 20s, and now that I'm in my mid 20s, I feel like there's a place and time for those style. You know, I don't want to say like a 1-to-1 homage, but a very close homage, especially as you're coming into the hobby and you're kind of figuring out what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a good place for it there. But I think once you kind of dive in and you get bit by the bug and you're really just, you know, into the community, for me, every time I've handled an homage watch, I look at it and I can see, okay, this is what they were trying to do. I like the way the original was done better. I think they have a place, but it's a substitute, not really an alternative.
Yeah.
In a bad way.
Yeah. Ricardo, how about you? Have you ever owned an homage watch in your collecting history? How do you feel about
I haven't necessarily owned one. I've reviewed like one or two in the past. And what I have to say is it's so much worse than like the alternative. Because with the homage, what ends up happening is it's either going to let you know, okay, I really, really want the original.
Mm-hmm.
Or for the most part, you're saying like, this just can't compete with like the original. And there are certain quirks or certain things about it that just stand in the way. What I find homages to be great for is if like you can't get your hands on the original at all, either where you're located or, you know, maybe you don't have a lot of watch groups around you, so you don't have somebody walking around with a tank or a Rolex, and you're kind of just like, okay, you know, I want to at least see how this looks on my wrist and wear this around for a little while. I'll move it on to someone else afterwards, but like this will give me the vibe. But if you're anywhere near like a watch group or any, especially here in New York,
mm-hmm.
like I feel like I could walk down the street and bump into someone that has one of those watches. And if you're at a meetup, you're bound to find at least 3 or 4 who are easily just going to say, hey, if you want to try this on, and you try it on and you're just like, okay, yeah, this, I'm willing to wait. I want this.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point. I hadn't even thought of it, but like I think the experience of just like trying on one of these watches in like a real world setting, like the real thing, is like a better experience than owning the homage watch if it's not like done particularly well. Like, yeah. I think this kind of gets into the idea of like appreciating watches without like possessing them, without owning them, which is something that I think about a lot, you know, especially as, you know, like the conversation around pricing continues to happen as prices continue to go up. I've always kind of felt like, you know, obviously we should pay attention to pricing, but it's sort of incidental because you don't need to like own a watch necessarily to appreciate it. You know, it's like you wouldn't walk through, you know, a museum and think like, oh man, this like, I'll never own this Picasso. Like I'm so angry, you know.
Fair.
But like,
yeah, that's a good point.
You know, if you have a chance to like try on a, you know, like a mill sub or something, you know, that you would never think, like you would never, you know, spend that much money on yourself, or it's too rare to acquire. Like having a chance to like wear one of those like a couple times a year at like watch meetups, you know, if you have a friend who owns one or you have a contact like that, and I think that is maybe to me like more satisfying than having like knockoff, copy, like an homage. That's just me personally. I'd be curious to hear what, listeners might think of that. It sort of betrays, I guess, my overall negative view towards the homage watches, but that's sort of just how it shakes out for me.
Trying it on will get you closer to making a final decision than the homage, because at least trying it on, like every nook, every cranny, every like facet, you're seeing it, you're feeling it, and then you're able to make that decision.
Yeah.
With the homage, as close as you want to get, like you're still going to have a little question in your mind. Like, is it like, am I really like now decided that I want to get that watch?
Right.
Or like, do I still need like another homage or something even closer? And that's the other thing with the homages. Like you end up, there are opportunities there for you to just fall down a rabbit hole because you're trying to find the closest thing to the original.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're 3 in and you're like, I still haven't felt what the original feels like.
Right. And there's different degrees of homages. There's like the bottom of the basement $30 AliExpress version. And then there's like much more expensive, homages. Maybe some of them will come up today. I don't know. It's it's sort of a slippery slope. And before you know it, you just have a bunch of watches that are, really sort of kind of unoriginal in their execution. So anyway, let's get into this little exercise here that we've created. I asked you guys to come up with a handful of alternatives to 2 like pretty popular watches that like honestly come up all the time in this conversation. At least they did for me when I was, like on the forums, every single day on my lunch breaks at work, just finding ways to waste time throughout the day. So we're going to talk about alternatives to the Rolex Submariner and the Cartier Tank, which maybe a little on the nose. Those are like 2 of the most popular watches in the world, 2 of the most easily identifiable watches in the world, but also like 2 of the most like, copied in various ways watches in the world. So I thought it would be like interesting to kind of think up some alternatives for these watches that are like not strictly speaking homages, but have like an original spin to them that, like makes sense from an enthusiast perspective. So let's start with the Submariner. Garrett, what have you got as an alternative to the Rolex Submariner?
Yeah, I mean, I think kicking this off, when I think about the sub, really at its core it's a dive watch with black bezel and at least 100 meters of water resistance. That's kind of the box that I put it into to kind of frame alternatives around that. So with that in mind, if you wanted to come at it from a budget perspective, you're in college or you're fresh out of college and get into watches, in my opinion, I'd go with the Citizen Fujitsubo. Extremely capable diver. You can get them in titanium or you can get them in steel. So lightweight, heavy, on bracelet, on rubber, on nylon. You can kind of do whatever you want to do there. And it's by no means like, I would call it an homage, but you get a very capable dive watch that kind of mimics the characteristics you're getting with the sub. And you can kind of start your rabbit hole from there.
Yeah, that's a really good pick. And I think I like that pick because it's an original Citizen design. It's not it's not Citizen trying to copy anything. It's a historic design from their archives. It's been brought back. And, it's like, it's very much its own thing. And you can sort of think of it as like, Citizen's own expression of that sort of like everyday professional dive watch, which like virtually every brand does. And there are, like many, many different ways that brands do it. And, some of them kind of look like the sub, some of them look nothing like the sub. And like Citizen's version is like, sort of like a good sort of like in between place. It's an attractive watch. It, it has like some historical precedence, but it's also like very much its own thing. So, and like to your point, there's a bunch of different variants and options available to you as well. That's a really good pick.
And I think another thing that kind of solidifies it is that you can, Citizen's a very widespread carried brand. So you don't have to go into like a Rolex AD to even go try it on. You could go into a big box store and try it on with very little pressure.
Yep. You can buy that watch in a mall somewhere in America. It's like it's very accessible. And that's, I think, an important thing to kind of keep in mind, through this conversation. Like you can't just go in to a Rolex, to the Rolex AD and just like walk out with a Submariner. Like it's not as tough to get one now as it was like 3 or 4 years ago, but like you're going to wait. And it's also like a lot more a lot more money. So I think access is an important part of the conversation as well. Ricardo, do you have a pick for a Rolex Submariner alternative?
So I kind of had the same thought process as Garrett. If you want something that has a little bit of history to it and is more affordable or easily attainable, and I landed on definitely the Sea Hunter, the recent release from Caravelle by Bulova. I feel like that watch, the history behind that watch, it's part of our original design. And it kind of represents an era as well, which I really like about the watch, and I think is something that you something that many people may not immediately think about when they think about the Submariner, but I feel like there is a sense of nostalgia there. There is a sense of that classic design that a lot of people want. And that watch, the Sea Hunter, kind of gives it to you at a super affordable price point. It's less than $400.
Yeah.
Still 200 meters of water resistance. Yeah, there may be some design points that people may not side with, but I think as an overall package, it's really hard to look at that watch and not say that, wow, this is a pretty good all-around watch for the price point and what it is you're getting.
Yeah, that is a man. So a couple of things. So like Devin Pennypacker wrote a really good review of that watch, and he's talking about it a lot. I just heard him on the A Tale of Two Wristies podcast, where he spent a considerable amount of time talking about that watch. We'll link to that in the show notes. It's a really good listen. Folks should check that out if they haven't already. That watch, I know it's done well in the shop. Maybe you can speak to that, Ricardo. And the post that Devin wrote is just like it's still like performing like really well, like a month later. People just seem to really be responding to that watch. So like, like they tapped into something. Bulova did when they decided to kind of like raid the archives and revisit Caravelle, because like it's they've identified like a very specific thing that people want, like a very affordable, vintage inspired dive watch with a name that they have maybe heard but are not like super familiar with. It has like some real history to it. It's a pretty exciting watch, and like you said, for under $400, it's like insanely good value.
It's a guilt-free obsession.
Yeah,
guilt-free watch that you could obsess over. Like there's no one who could do even a lick of research can look at that watch and be like, oh, this is just a / copy of this or / It's a beautiful watch that has history in its own right. And I think if you're getting into watches, and I know how I was when I was first getting into watches, that was definitely one of the things I was looking for. I wanted to be different, but not so different. And a watch like that perfectly aligns with that goal.
Yeah,
it's a watch that has history to it. It's affordable, and it's also a watch that, like, if you're in the community, a little bit about the history, the importance of that watch, and like especially through Devin's article, like you really see the story behind it, and like that's a guilt-free. Oh yeah, for $375, yeah, all day I'll just buy that watch. Yeah, that's how I feel about that one.
Garrett, I imagine you had some time to handle that watch when it came through the office. Do you have any thoughts on the Caravelle?
Yeah, so I mean, I was fortunate enough when we were in Chicago, I got to handle the pre-production prototype of the new Sea Hunter and as well as the original Caravelle diver, and putting them side by side. I mean, you can just see that Bulova very carefully looked at what they had done and found a spin that definitely, paid tribute to where they had been while creating something new. I mean, at its core, you can tell it's a sub $400 diver, but for what it is, you get, a lot of good features. The bezel feels nice. The bracelet, you could have some complaints there. Maybe it's not the best feeling bracelet ever, but for a stock option on a sub $400 watch, it's fantastic, in my opinion. I mean, it's one of those pieces that I think you could pick it up as like a first or second, third watch pickup in your collection. And even when you get around to your 15th or 20th watch, you may still reach for it and wear it, occasionally. It's something that you're going to put in the collection, and I think you'll keep for a good period of time.
Yeah. So regarding the bracelet, I feel like, I mean, that's totally a fair criticism, but it's also like the most easily replaceable thing Like there are, 100%. There's like, I mean, I would argue like that watch probably even like looks better on like certain straps, or certainly on like pass through fabric straps. Like that's what it seems to be kind of like made for. No one should be buying a sub $400 watch based on bracelet quality.
No,
like this is a place where shortcuts are taken so that everything else can be like a little bit nicer. But yeah, no, that watch is it's a really, really cool piece. I'll be curious to see what Bulova does to kind of like expand that Caravel line is it going forward, especially after what seems like runaway success for this watch. So yeah, it's a very cool pick. The watch I chose, I have a few watches written down here, but the one I'd like to talk about is the Laurier Neptune. Laurier makes a lot of like really interesting vintage inspired divers that I feel like are just different enough from the watches that inspired them to like not be in that like straight up homage category. And the other thing that Laurier does is they're very transparent about where they draw that design inspiration from, whether it's a watch or a car or a building or any number of things. Like they kind of like discuss that in their press materials and on their website, like why these watches exist and why they look the way they do. And I wanted to pick a micro brand, like a small brand that is sort of like a core enthusiast brand. And there's a number I could have picked. Maybe you guys have some other suggestions, but I've always been drawn to Laurier. I just like their vibe. I like that they're a New York company. I like that they have like a really clear sort of like design vision that is like coherent throughout all of their watches. And the Neptune to me is sort of like the ideal way to kind of get the look and feel of a vintage Rolex Submariner without spending like your life savings on a vintage Submariner. And it's like a watch that you can wear every day and feel good about, sort of like banging around, obviously in a way that you can't with a vintage sub. And the nice thing about these, like say sub $1,000, micro brand, watches that sort of seek to replicate in some way, like very famous and sought after vintage watches, is that because of the price constraints that, Laurier, has and other micro brands have, there's like a kind of like a lightness to these watches that like makes it really feel like a vintage watch. And I hope that doesn't sound like I'm slighting Laurier for build quality or anything. I've owned multiple Lauriers. They all, are very, very nicely made, but they do have like a real sort of like vintage feel to them because of like the proportions and just the way that the like the cases and bracelets are designed. That feels vintage in like a really nice way without some of like the headaches of owning a vintage watch. So they make a number of watches that could potentially be alternatives, quote unquote, to a Rolex Submariner. I own the most recent Hydra, which is kind of like a more contemporary, sports watch with a GMT functionality, but could also be in that Submariner family, I guess, if you squint a little bit. But I really like what they do. They've been doing it really well for a number of years now, and so the Neptune is one of the first watches that came to mind for me going through this exercise.
No, I think that's a solid pick. I mean, it's, in this kind of space that we're theoretically dealing with, and there's a lot of give and take to kind of, obviously you can't do a one-to-one reproduction, and Laurier does a really good job, like you mentioned, of drawing inspiration while also putting on their own unique spin to make it something that feels kind of cohesive, but also unique in a lot of ways.
You guys have any other kind of like honorable mention Rolex Submariner alternatives you want to get out there real quick? I've got a few. If you don't, go ahead, Ricardo.
I was gonna say for sure, running down the line of like in its own right and just its own type of style, I'd have to go with like the Doxa. Doxa 200T, 300T. There's so many options, but that watch on that beads of rice bracelet, it's a classic look. It's a modern watch that forever looks classic and vintage, and there's just an appeal to that. It kind of checks some of the same boxes that you would feel with the Submariner, and it's just a good watch in its own right. And for sure, I thought about it when we were thinking about this one.
Yep, no, that's another good example of a watch that's like very much its own thing, and like a legitimate like kind of like iconic sports watch in the same way that the Submariner is. So yeah, that's a really good pick. How about you, Garrett? Any sort of like honorable mentions in the Submariner category for?
Yeah, just kind of two, and vastly different in their own rights and vastly different than the Sub. The first one that I kind of thought of was the Certina DS Action Diver, another Penny Packer favorite.
Yep.
He absolutely loves that watch.
That should be a drop down on the website, Penny Packer favorites.
We should make a whole collection that's just like, Penny Packer
picks.
Yeah, Penny Packer picks, of course. Yeah,
Packer picks.
Yeah,
perfect. You heard it here first, folks. So keep your eyes out.
Hashtag Penny Packer picks.
Yeah, it's a fantastic watch in its own right. Obviously, vastly different style. We got two in the office that I got a chance to spend some time with. And just the one thing that really kind of jumped out to me was that the loom itself was very like blue and in your face, which I kind of liked, and made of titanium. So they felt lightweight, but not chintzy. They felt very well made without, feeling like 5 pounds of watch on your wrist, but, like I said, very capable in its own right. And the other kick to that moving up market would be the Omega Seamaster. Very iconic in its own design. When you think about like capable watches in my mind, and granted, I'm not the biggest Bond fan, but I know there was a Bond sub in history, and then it became a Bond Seamaster. And kind of in my mind, if it was good enough for Bond on the big screen, then it's got to be a phenomenal alternative.
Yep. I mean, that's that kind of leads right into my honorable mention, which is the Tudor Black Bay, which is a kind of like an obvious answer as an alternative to a sub, but like it's roughly half the cost of a Submariner, and I would argue that it's a cooler watch than the Submariner in 2025. Like it's more of like an inside baseball kind of thing if you approach it from a watch enthusiast angle. It communicates something completely different when you are wearing a Tudor Black Bay versus a Submariner, which is it's a great watch, but it's also got some baggage with it, and the Tudor's just different. And it's I own a Tudor Black Bay. I love it. I wouldn't say that it like scratches a Submariner itch, because I've owned a Submariner as well, and like a Tudor is a different experience, but I enjoy wearing it more and owning it more than I did the Submariner. I think because of like the Rolex baggage, there's just something, I don't know, it's hard to quantify, but there's just something, there's like a cool factor with that watch, when you start thinking of it in comparison to the Rolex, that is appealing to me. So yeah, that's maybe an obvious pick for an alternative, but I just wanted to call that.
I was thinking about that as an alternative, and I was like, I bet Kazan's going to pick this one. So I'm happy to hear that it was one of your other mentions.
I'm nothing if not a little bit predictable.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Let's move on to the Cartier Tank. That's the other watch I asked you guys to kind of come up with some alternatives for. I wrote down a bunch of watches for this, but let's get our top line choices out of the way. Ricardo, what'd you go with for a Cartier Tank alternative?
This was quite a battle. Two things. First thing that came to mind was vintage, actually. In terms of alternatives, you could find so many beautiful Hamiltons, Seikos, that all kind of have that form factor, that you could even find some pretty good versions that give you that vibe, give you that classic tank shape. But then, like, when I started thinking modern, it's hard not to think about the Rivenera from Eco Nutra. It's a beautiful titanium, like almost brutalist way of doing the tank, but there's just something really nice about it. Like, even though like from the pictures you may think, yeah, that doesn't have like some of the glitz and glam that the tank may give you, but it's special in its own right. It has this. I would probably wear that watch more. If I had both, I would probably wear the Rivenera more than the tank, simply because I feel like sometimes the tank gets lost in like its history, its different versions. Whereas like you see the Rivenera and it's hard not to look at that watch and just be like, oh wow, what is that? And for me, yeah, really, I think they did an amazing job kind of creating their own version of a tank.
Yeah. I love that watch. That watch was on my list. It was a watch I was going to talk about if neither of you did. So I'm glad it was the first one mentioned. Still, like, honestly, like, in the time I've been reviewing watches, it was one of the most satisfying watches to write a review about, because it felt like something like genuinely original, like with a real perspective, and also just like such a surprise coming from that brand. Like they had never made anything quite like it up to that point, and now they've built out the collection with multiple dial variants, and I have a feeling there'll be more interesting things to come, kind of like along those lines. Let's just say, putting that out there. So yeah, love the Ribonaire. That's a great pick. I'll leave a link in the show notes to the review of it that I wrote of it. We also made a video for it, which was a lot of fun. Yeah, Ribonaire is a fantastic watch. That's excellent pick. Garrett, how about you? What's your tank alternative, and what was your process for this like? Like, did you like stick to just rectangular watches, or like how did you sort of like figure out like how to even approach the tank alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I gave myself 2 rules, and I immediately broke one of them. But one of them was I wanted something that was readily available on the market. You could theoretically go and buy today, order it, and have it shipped to you in the next couple of weeks. And the other kind of kicker that I went with was that I didn't want to necessarily limit myself to square or rectangular watches. I think, when you think of the tank, obviously there's a, kind of a default image that pops in your mind, but it's had so many different variations, the actual tank itself, some of the other, I'll say homages. And I just mean that in stuff that's kind of loosely designed around the same kind of characteristics, but kind of, and this is where I broke my rule. The top pick that I had was the Laurier Zephyr, which unfortunately just did its final run and was discontinued, I believe, due to the movement itself being discontinued. But if you think about a tank alternative, something small that's on your wrist, it's very easy to wear for men or women, large or small wrist. You can kind of play with it either way. The Zephyr for me, has a lot of that kind of Art Deco elements with the pattern, and it's reminiscent of the tank, but also visually vastly different. We've got one of our, I believe, a Slack Plus member that comes to one of our meetups, and every time I see her, she wears a Zephyr. And I mean, like across our office, I can be like, yep, I can't even remember her name. I don't even know if I know her name, but I know she wears the Zephyr.
You know the Zephyr, yeah.
Yeah, we have a wonderful conversation every time, and I love seeing her Zephyr, and it's a bit more scratched and beat up each time, but just a phenomenal watch in its own right, and a perfect alternative in my mind.
Yeah, the Zephyr's a cool one. That's another one that I reviewed. We'll put a link to that one in the show notes as well. It's similar in a lot of ways in its approach, I think, to the Ribonaire, and that it's a big departure for the brand. Like that watch is very different, as like a release for Laurier, in a similar way that Echo Neutra's Ribonaire was a real departure for them, which like adds a layer of excitement, to these watches. That's kind of undeniable. But yeah, that's another good pick. I didn't realize they had discontinued it because of the movement. That's or discontinued it at all. That's disappointing. Hopefully they'll have something else in the pipeline. I caught it
by surprise on social media and just saw that it was, like hey, we're doing one last run. And it unfortunately was one of those things that I had it on my list of potential pickups, got distracted, and I was looking at alternatives this morning, kind of putting the final pieces of my list together, and had to run it by Ricardo to verify, but it's no longer on their website. So hopefully I'd love to see Laurier do, a V2, a V3, whatever you want to call it, even if it, fundamentally changes some of the dimensions. I think if you could, kind of build off the heritage that or the foundation they've created, and kind of continue that product family for them, it could be really cool.
Yeah. It's one of those watches, and it's one of the biggest issues I've had with the tank in the past is it's one of those watches that I never felt quite right on my wrist. Like either the size, like I could never find the Goldilocks size with the tank. It was either way too big and felt like just a flat slab on my wrist, or it was way too small and just felt like it disappeared on my wrist. It's one of the reasons like I feel anyone who tries to go after like a tank alternative should spend a lot of time just looking at the dimensions and like getting a good understanding of how a rectangular watch sits on the wrist and like how you should size it. And that watch just found like a sweet spot. Anytime I'd try on the Zephyr with Laurier, it would always just feel like they just understood, okay, this feels good. Whereas, yeah, there have been a lot of other alternatives I felt that just way too big.
Yep. No, it's definitely a case where they got the proportions right for sure with that watch. Let's see. I'm looking at my list of watches here. Obviously, the Rivenera has been taken.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'll do a couple things here. I want to call out the Seiko tank dupes that are always available and very accessible, like even on Amazon, like as of like right now. I think I saw some for like in the $400 or $500 range. Like they're pretty affordable. These kind of like these might fall into homage territory depending on your definition of homage. Seiko's been making them for a really long time, and they've got a lot of their own sort of like varieties of these sort of like rectangular gold tone often watches with sort of like similar dial treatments, but a huge variety of dial treatments, but often similar to the tank. But these watches, like you can like dial them in and like get a size that's like very equivalent to the tank if you if you're careful, and you just gotta look at the specs, obviously. So it is a way to kind of like test out the size and get a get a feeling for that. Also, a lot of them are solar powered, which is nice. Like that's just a good feature. And Cartier does make, or did make, I don't think they still in production, but they did make a solar powered tank for a little while. I think there were maybe some problems with the movement, or but hey, a Seiko solar powered tank dupe is, if you're not inclined to like wear a dress watch all the time, but like if you're the type of person that like needs one, for the random function or whatever, and you like the look of a tank, you could do a lot worse than a Seiko tank dupe. And Seiko's like obviously a real watch brand, a real company. They're not just like churning these things out, for the sake of like copying Cartier. Like they, this is a popular design. It's a mass market product. It's out there for you. The other direction I think you can go is to actually like stay in the Cartier family and just like look at like vintage tank musts from like the 80s. You can find them like, I haven't looked at prices in a while, but like they're pretty affordable, compared to like a modern precious metal tank. A lot of them are like gold plated silver, which is like pretty undesirable, or historically pretty undesirable, as for collectors, because those cases can tarnish and chip, and they're, just sort of hard to maintain. But if you're willing to kind of like, go that route, there's a lot of cool dial options for it if you go with tank musts. Some of them have become very collectible, and are sort of like, sought after and tough to find, but there's just an endless number of variants of these. They were meant to be a mass market sort of like play for Cartier in the 80s, and so they made a ton of them. So there's a lot out there, and it's a watch that like has the Cartier signature. It's not necessarily like you're not getting like modern day Cartier quality, with these watches, but it's Cartier design, and that's really like the important thing when it comes to the tank, I think, is it's like ultimately a design piece. So yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind for me, is to just like stay in the Cartier folds and look at vintage tank musts.
Yes. Nice.
Yeah.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you go vintage, granted, there's inherently some risk with doing so, but you do kind of open up your options a lot in terms of availability, and you can, play within your budget there and get some really cool things.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any other watches? I didn't ask you guys to prepare anything specific for this, but I was curious if like there are any other watches that you like that could be seen as like alternatives to other things. I'll go first here, because like I have a Christopher Ward Belcanto, and I love that watch, and it's when I wear it, it feels like a wholly original thing. A lot of people think of it as like an MB&F sort of like, look-alike. And I see that. And with the new logo, I think you can even make even a stronger case for that. I love both of those watches, like not because they feel like alternatives to those watches, and I don't think you should like think of them that way, but it's an interesting way, I think, that like a more affordable, approachable brand is creating something with the feeling of those like higher end watches. And I think that like you can actually get pretty close. I've been lucky enough, like I've been able to wear like, like MBNF watches and Moser watches and like other kind of like high end modern, like independent watches that have a similar aesthetic. And I think like you get pretty close to that experience with some of these more adventurous kind of like small independents that are in the affordable space, like Christopher Ward and the Belcanto. Arcanaut is another example brand that I love, that I feel like you're getting some of that sort of like high end indie aesthetic and that experience of wearing something exotic. For a lot less money, for like an Arcanaut is like $4,000 or $5,000 these days. You're not spending six figures on a on an MBNF, and it's an approximation of the feeling, and it's like a very different quality experience. Obviously it's like not as high end in terms of the watchmaking, but like the design is like, it's like it gets you part of the way there, and I think that's notable. So did you guys have any picks sort of like along those lines, like a watch you wanted to call out?
Yeah, I had like 3.
Okay, let's go.
So the first 2, I was just thinking about, when I started thinking about the tank, I started thinking about, okay, like what watches straddle that line perfectly between like a casual and a dressy watch without falling over the line into like an integrated sports watch.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 2 that came to mind. One on the more affordable range is the Super Seville from Bulova. I think that design, like, it's hard to look at that watch and immediately think this is just an integrated sports watch. It gives you more of like a really nice classic casual to dressy watch. Like on the bracelet, you could dress it up, you could dress it down, but you don't immediately think, okay, this is like a sporty integrated racer watch. So there's that. Another watch along those lines that kind of gave me the same vibe, and I like it, especially when it kind of made the news last year with the Cubitus, was the Scar 4 from Benjamin James. I think that's just a beautifully done, less rectangular, more squarish watch that just looks really nice. I've had a chance to try one on. The quality is amazing. I think they recently came out with some stone dials that make it look even better. So those were 2. And then along the lines of what you said about the Arcanaut and what you said about MBMF, I think the World Timer from Space One is like, it's just like right along that avenue of something interesting. I guess we have Wolf guests here in the office.
We knew something like this could happen today. There's a lot of
because we also have our store open, so I'm willing to bet that one of our customers brought in the dog. But yeah, that World Timer from Space One, from the second I saw it, I was just like, this is nice.
Yeah, like
this is right along the lines of a perfect like alternative, and I would say less an alternative, just like a really interesting like watch design and mix of complication. Yeah.
Yep. No, it's a completely original concept. I mean, like the idea of like bringing kind of like higher end astronomical complications into like an affordable package is just like a really cool thing that they're pursuing. So all the Space One watches are kind of like in that like same sort of like, Arcanaut, Christopher Ward logo, Christopher Ward Belcanto sort of like group for me, for sure. Garrett, how about you? Anything kind of like jump to mind in this sort of like wild card category that I've thrust upon you?
It's one of those things. You've hit me unprepared here, and I love it. It's kind of one of those categories that's so broad that there's really any higher end watch you can think of. There's some alternative out there in different ways. I personally don't have one that I can call out at the moment. So I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have anything else, and then I can kind of maybe circle back to me. Let me see if I can think of something.
I mean, let's pitch it to the listeners, and if they have if they have suggestions in this in this area, they can jump in our Slack. or hit us up on Instagram and let us know, not just about this category, but also the idea of like these alternatives sort of like in general, I think we'd love to hear from all of our listeners who have something to say on the matter. Like I said, is one of the most discussed sort of like topics in the watch community. So I'm sure there will be some thoughts out there. So would love to hear from folks. This is a really fun conversation, guys. I'm glad we were able to, chat about some alternatives to these like extremely well-known watches. I hope people got some cool ideas maybe from the watches we suggested. And like I said, if listeners have suggestions for other watches that they'd like us to, to address and kind of like go through this thought experiment with, definitely share those with us on social media or in our Warner Plus Slack. I did ask you guys, can't accuse me of catching unprepared for this. I did ask you guys to come up with some cultural recommendations, things that listeners can watch or read or do, things that you've come across on the internet or in real life even, that you wanted to recommend more broadly. Garrett, what have you got this week for a cultural rec?
Yeah, I mean, granted, we're coming up on a very busy time here in New York with all of the watch media and everything that's going on. There's I think a lot of things that are going on social media wise. It's easy to get sucked in your phone, and I'm very guilty of that. So my recommendation this week is, take an hour, take a day, get outside, clear your head, step away from the internet, and just enjoy the start of some fall weather if it's starting to change where you're at, and just spend some time offline. Change it up.
A good recommendation. This podcast will come out ahead of Columbus Day weekend, which is like traditionally like peak foliage season in New England. I have to say, I live in New England, and we're already a little bit past peak. We're recording on October 3rd, and I was going to maybe try to get up into the White Mountains this weekend, but apparently it's a lot of browns.
Go for it. There's nothing wrong with some brown leaves. Even they look good.
I want to see those dramatic reds, Garrett. That's fair. That's what I'm looking for, and I fear I've missed them. But maybe I'll be on the hunt this weekend. But I like that recommendation. Always good to kind of like disconnect, especially if you're part of the watch world and you're about to be extremely connected over the next couple of weeks. I know I will be for sure. Ricardo, what about you? What have you got for a cultural rec this week?
I feel bad because it's the complete opposite.
That's okay. Mine is also pretty opposite.
So I've got to give a little backstory to this. Me and my wife have this habit of, when we both get home from work and our son is in bed ready for school, we take turns. Something she likes, we watch. Something I like, we watch. Or something that we both like are flipping channels and we find interesting. So one thing we came across was this show, this new reality TV competition show on Netflix called Sidemen Inside. Very interesting in that, like, I've watched a lot of these in the past, and this was one of the first times where it really felt like you could not guess what was going to happen next. There was random competitions, like literally at the beginning of one day, someone was in power. Hours later, they lost their power. They were off their show, and someone else was in power. It's something rarely seen, especially with competition reality TV shows nowadays. They all feel they have that bit of that feeling of feeling scripted, or that you could sit down and say, "Oh, I know what's going to happen." On this show, yeah, it completely unexpected, and it was just a good binge watch. It's not super long. It's not like 20 episodes. It's maybe a long night, but it's worth it. It's just fun.
Okay. I'm not familiar with this show. I will find a trailer or description and put the link in the show notes. And if you hate it, Ricardo's DMs are open. So just feel free to,
as long as you tell me why you hate it and we could have like a good conversation about why you hate it. That's value. That's value to me. No cursing, no bad words, but just a good back and forth.
Fair enough.
And agree to disagree in that. But yeah, it's a good show.
Okay,
I'm sticking by it.
My recommendation is a movie. Surprise, surprise. I'm
shocked there.
Yeah, I'm recommending One Battle After Another, the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie. We recently recorded a Time on Screen podcast for Paul Thomas Anderson's classic film There Will Be Blood, which is kind of like the critical consensus, like best movie of his career. I think maybe the consensus might be shifting towards this movie, or maybe it will in 5 to 10 years time. It's really great. I would say it's easily the best reviewed movie of the year so far. Rarely do I think a movie that gets this much hype is deserving of it, but I think it's pretty deserving of it. It's great. It's a really exciting kind of contemporary action movie through PTA's very unique sort of lens. It's a little hard to describe. It's just the title kind of gives something away, because it's just one exciting set piece after another, and the performances are really great. It's a wonderful movie. It's a great entertainment, and it's very timely and relevant for a lot of reasons that happy to discuss in my DMs, but maybe not on the podcast, at least not this podcast. But it's great. Go see it on the biggest screen you can.
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to live in a place where it's screening in VistaVision, so it's currently screening in VistaVision in New York and Los Angeles and in Boston. Lucky us who live in the Boston area.
Nice.
And in London, if you're overseas, there's a VistaVision screening there. 4 places in the world. If you live in one of those 4 cities and you love movies, go see One Battle After Another in VistaVision. It's a once in a lifetime experience. It's fantastic. And if you live anywhere else, just go see it on the biggest screen you can. So yeah. Wonderful movie. Have you guys seen it yet?
No, I actually had plans I really wanted to see it in the VistaVision, but I think that run has kind of stopped.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Which side note, these short runs on IMAX and special screens really starting to get on my nerves. Because they sell out so quickly, and it's not fun.
Here's the thing about the large format film stuff is they made prints of this movie for 70 millimeter IMAX. And, similar to Oppenheimer a few years ago, those prints are going to be around. This movie will be back in 70 millimeter IMAX. Probably, maybe not VistaVision, but 70 millimeter IMAX is a great way to see a movie too. So Oppenheimer's been back, just in the short time since it, ran theatrically. So they're going to want to get their money's worth out of striking these very large, expensive film prints that are kind of exotic. So keep an eye out. It'll be back in the large format theaters eventually. But yeah, wonderful movie. Recommended.
They recently had a run on Interstellar as well. So yeah, you're right. I'll wait.
Yeah. That's one I really want to go see, because I missed the initial release of that, and so I'd love to go see that in IMAX. But to answer your question, because I haven't seen this one yet. We had this in Watch the Stories and Gear quite a while back with the trailer.
Oh, we've been following it for a year now, almost.
Yeah, and I think you wrote that one up for us, which great write up. I am historically not a movie guy. I've said that that shouldn't be a shock to anyone, but this one's kind of been on my radar. I didn't realize that it was out. It shows you how much I've been tracking it, but has kind of been on mine since you had wrote it up. So I'll have to try to go make it a point and go catch this.
One of my favorite moments on the Warner Wound podcast was when in a Q&A episode, someone asked us what our favorite mafia movies were. And Garrett's answer was the Fast and the Furious franchise, which, listen, it's just one of those, it's just a great moment in podcasting.
Oh yeah.
I'm clutching my heart here.
That one had almost died down. So
no, it's great. It's endearing.
Exactly.
We love it. We listen. Everyone's opinions are valid. It's fine. We enjoy it here. I think that puts a bow on it. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Ricardo. Yep. Thank you, Garrett, for joining me on the podcast this week, and thank you to everyone for tuning in once again. We will be back next week. I think next week is should be the big wind-up preview episode that we do. Don't quote me on that. But I think that's what it'll be. So stay tuned for that. And
if not, it's coming soon.
Yeah, it's coming soon, because Wind-Up's coming soon. So we got to do the preview episode soon, I would imagine. So
deep breaths,
everybody. We'll get there shortly. Thank you, guys. Thank you, listeners. We will see you again soon. Take care.